Hi and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 158, and today we're going to be talking about negative space win rates and openness. And don't worry, if that's not clear, hopefully it will be clear at the end of it. You have a nice picture, for those of you watching and for those of you on YouTube, of negative space green mana symbol in one of those OTJ lands. That's a perfect example of what I'm trying to talk. The win rate of things that are not there. And openness is a vague concept that I tried to define multiple times, and hopefully I got a decent version of it right now, so we can talk about that. I can't say no to my illustrious sponsor that sponsor me via the medium of Patreon. And since I last was talking about it, Copper Cloud upgraded their membership. Thank you very much, Coppershit. And Matthias returned as a patron. Always good to see someone returning. But of course, always also good to see someone new coming in. So if you are feeling like that, go to my Patreon and subscribe. Also, thanks to mtgazone.com and thanks to Bulkbox for supporting me all through those years. Hopefully soon there's going to be some changes in that, but for now it is what it is. And we can move to my preamble, which sometimes links to the episode, sometimes is topical, sometimes it's other things. It's my version of sign off. I start with a sign off and then I end up with doing nothing. So, but most of my content is sort of run of the mill. I have a formula of what I'm doing. I'm going to start with skeletons, which is before the set is released. And good news, we have it scheduled for the Monday, so you will only have to wait 4 days for the next episode. Then I run the early data episode when we look at the first glance at the data. People learn what cards are good in the given format and try to figure out where to go from there. Then we try to look a bit more granular. We look at the cards that are good in particular archetypes, and we try to figure out using the data again which cards have specific home, which cards are universally good, and try to figure out those things. And then I usually do something draft-based, and then I do something game-based, and then I do something different most of the time, because I do like to experiment with the numbers. I do like to do some experiments with the data. I think that if we limit ourselves to this run-of-the-mill content, we never push things forward. And I run one experiment per format that tackles different things. Some time ago, I did a whole episode on signals. Some time ago, I did a whole episode on utilization of resources. Sometimes I do something completely different. And today is that day when I looked at data from Final Fantasy and I tried to answer some new questions. Because I do like experimenting. And again, lots of those things moved on to be the staples of my content right now. And I'm pretty sure that some of the things that I'm talking about today are also going to inform my content later. So where to start if you want to do any research? By the way, this episode, I planned it to give you sort of like an insight into the process of data analysis, not only as the results. Sometimes you just will see the results, but you don't see the process behind it. I want to walk you through how I do it from point zero to sort of completed analysis. Although it's not fully completed, I will probably still need to redo some stuff and hone it, because the first analysis is always rough on the edges. It just happens. If I had to do it perfectly clear, I would have to release this episode somewhere midway through Edge of Eternities, and I don't have time for that, so I'm going to release it as much as I did so far, and then I'm probably going to reiterate it, try to do it again with the new set, but this time I will not have to discover everything on the way. I will already have some things shortcutted. I will have some code written. I will have some ways of analyzing. I know what are the dead end streets and stuff like that. So the second time you do an analysis is always way, way, way easier. And after some time, it becomes the run-of-the-mill. But you can't become a run-of-the-mill situation without being first a project and something unique and novel. But this one, normally this is the hardest part of where to start. How do I start an analysis? And I'm very fortunate because people ask me random things. And this is great because they ask me random things, and later I do this analysis and I publish it sort of, and I get the credit for it. I will always give credit to people that ask me questions, but it does put me on the right track. Now, obviously, You still need to think about the question really thoroughly in order to start a research project out of it. But the better the question, the easier it is to start that research project. And I had a very interesting question from Trumpetman, whom the long-standing listeners to the podcast might know as the person that used to do the set reviews with me at some stage. We skipped that idea. In the end, it was way too much time consuming for the results. But Trumpetman is a very good limited player and a very smart person that can think of things that no one else will do. So it's good to have occasional questions from Trumpetman. And this question was, how much better is a card's actual win rate against another when their ALSA differs? For example, if two cards win 57, but one is ALSA 5 and the other one is ALSA 7, the ALSA 5 card is generally a better card because it required a higher pick. But if they both suddenly are picked at ALSA 5, what would we see from their comparative win rates? And this is a very interesting question from one aspect, is that we look at the win rate of the cards, but the win rate of the card is dependent on several factors. One is card's raw power. Two is the card put in the right decks often? And three is, how early do you need to pick that card? And Trumpetman is very much right. A card with ALSA 7 and a card with ALSA 5 are not the same card, even if they have the same win rate. Because card with ALSA 5, you need to pick early because you know you won't get it late. Card with ALSA 7, you can pick a bit later. For those of you that don't know, ALSA, average last seen as. We're going to be talking about ALSA a bit later, and I'm going to show you the graphs how the ALSA looks like when it's disintegrated into its prime components. But generally, it is this sort of signature of how late does a card go, and the smaller the number, the earlier the card is picked. So a card with ALSA 5 is picked on average pick 5. Card with ALSA 7 is picked on average pick 7. That means, of course, that it's picked over a range of values, but the average will be that. So this is a very good question that looks at the interaction between card availability and its win rate. And I ignored the rest of that question because it was too hard to answer, because I would have to make a lot of very dodgy analyses that probably are loaded against itself. When I can't compare how much a card wins when it was picked as a pick 7 because it doesn't tell me much when the ALSA is 5 and so on. But it put me on track of sort of a modified version of this question. Do cards win more if they are picked later? And it instantly linked me with the concept of openness. So I often do an analysis of openness, especially for quick drafts. And I calculate openness in those cases by how many good cards of given color pair I will see in a draft on average. And for that, I look at the ALSAs of all the cards in the color pair that have a game and end win rate of over 56%. Very arbitrarily chosen number, and I sort of calculate how many of those will I see on average per draft by using the ALSA as a measurement. So I can calculate that if a card has ALSA of 4, I will see on average like 1.2 copies of that card per draft if it's a common, or 0.45 copies of that card if it's an uncommon. And I can calculate it for every good card in a given color combination. And then I sort of calculate that, an average draft, I will see 42 good Izzet cards, but I will only see 20 good Dimir cards for some reason. I don't know. I come up with those numbers. And based on the fact that I can see 42 good Izzet cards, I know that in quick draft, probably it's good to at least lean towards Izzet, because those bot drafts are quite predictable, and if I have those openness numbers, I can sort of like estimate what is the best lane. If I would see 40 good Izzet cards and 40 Dimir cards, then maybe Grix's sort of wedge is where I should position myself to be, and especially if I see only like 10 good Selesnya cards, for example. So this is a very rudimentary idea of the openness, and I was never super happy with it, because win rate is linked with ALSA, and because of that, if ALSA changes, my openness changes, and then the win rates drop and there are fewer cards in the category and stuff like that. So it was problematic from that point of view. I was never happy with it because it was slightly tautological. The problem with openness in general is that it will always be slightly tautological, as we will discover with this analysis, is also going to have elements of tautology if you pick the wrong numbers. But generally, the idea is that if you're drafting an open lane, it should give the results. I'm drafting an open color pair. I'm going to get better cards because exactly for the reasons that Trumpetman had this question. I will pick my ALSA 3 cards as if it was ALSA 5. I will pick my ALSA 5 cards as if the ALSA was 7 because the color is open. So those cards go later. Now we have to go to the concept of ALSA. And here it says Choco Common because Choco Common has ALSA of around 3, but actually the numbers are from some older set. I had those graphs ready, so I didn't make new ones because that would require me to recalculate ALSA, which takes ages if I do it myself. Even with coding, it's just super big files for those draft sets. But I would assume that it would look very similar to this graph. And here we could see how many copies of the card with ALSA 3 from some previous set that Choco Comment is pretending to be. Did I see in this analyzed number of drafts as pick 1, pick 2, pick 3, pick 4, pick 5, pick 6, and it goes to the end. What does it mean? First of all, it means that some of the cards that I opened here will disappear from the pack before pick 9. So not all of the Choco Comets will wheel. Only 60 will wheel. And 1,277 will not wheel. And because of that, their ALSA will be 1 for that calculation, because we opened them, we saw it last as first pick, and then they never reappeared. And for the ones that wheel, the ALSA will be 9, 60 of them. And then you can calculate 60 divided by 1,277 plus 60. It means that, probably like 5% of the time it wheels, roughly. And here we also could add this and this, and we will come with a number like 1,138. So at the second pick, we see 1,138 Choco Comets, but we should have roughly 1,300 of them, which means that a good 200 of the Choco Comets already disappear before we actually see it. So if we see it in pick 2, there were already some that disappeared. So there were pick 1s in a good number of times. And you can do that for all of those. After pick 6, nothing wheels. So here we know that we can see at pick 7, 140 Choco Comets still left out of the 1,300 that were open. So we see roughly 10% of the Choco Comets are still in the pack at pick 7. But because we know how many should be in the pack, because we know how many we opened, 1,277 plus 60, 1,337, we know that at every seat over thousands of drafts, good question, Curtis. I'll come back to that. Yes. They should be open at the same rate in every seat because it's just a very random process what you open. So we can know how many are gone from the pack just by looking at those numbers and comparing them and seeing how many will wheel. And from that, we know that if we see a card sort of rarely at a given time, like this ALSA 3 card at pick 5, we will see around 400 from the around 1,300, which means we see roughly a third of the card that was open still in the pack, but 66% already gone at pick 5. So the first 4 people, 66% of the time, already snatched the card from you. And that means that we are observing something that doesn't happen very often. Sometimes we will see that Choco Comet at pick 5 because there were a bunch of good red cards in the pack, and that is not really a useful information because other people are picking red. It's just there were stronger cards than Choco Comet, or they don't know that Choco Comet is a strong card. But sometimes it will mean that no one is interested in red. And this is the moment when we get the signal, when we see something that happens rarely. Question from Goraitis from the chat isn't ALSA dependent on the pack? Some cards I will very much pick one, pack one, but very rarely pick three, pick one, like 5 color cards. Yes, yes, yes. There is 2 golden rules. I've did it in previous episodes when I looked at ALSA per pack. This is an ALSA from the whole draft, so it agglomerates pack 1, pack 2, pack 3. If you look at pick 1 versus pick 3, which are the biggest differences, in first packs, the multicolor cards disappear faster than in pack 3. And that, of course, means that you can get them much later in pack 3. So if you find a good color, and then maybe you'll be rewarded in pack 3 with the good multicolor cards for your color, if you found a lane that is yours and open and no one is competing for it. Very reversely, mana fixing can be picked much later in pack 1 because people prioritize playable cards over fixing. But in pack 3, they are usually short on fixing because they didn't prioritize it early. And because of that, it's much harder to get good fixing in pack 3. So good strategy for that is, pick this fixing early in pack 1, and then pack 3, you can reap the rewards when people are scrambling for fixing, and you can focus on good cards. Bit risky, and some people prefer to pick the good cards early, but set over set, I see that it's much easier to get fixing early. Especially important for those of you that like to draft multicolor decks, or maybe something like Town's deck or something. Okay, but the whole point with Signal is that one card is not much information. People tend to sort of like give way too much meaning to seeing this one card late. This one Choco Comet pick 5, and they'll go, oh, there was a late Choco Comet. That's pretty important information for me because it's easy to remember those things. But I did a lot of testing, and like seeing a card really late did not correspond to seeing more cards of that color later. So I did an episode ages ago. I think it's episode 84, if you really want to listen to it. Just to respond to Goraitis. So a card may have pack 1 ALSA of 3, a pack 2 ALSA of 6, and pack 3 ALSA of 9, and it would have an average ALSA of 6 on 17 lands. Yes. However, you will never have that big differences. The more likely scenario is going to be it will have an ALSA of 5.2 in pack 1, an ALSA of 6 in pack 2, and maybe 6.4 in pack 3. The differences are, I've never seen, I think, a difference of more than one pick between the cards. They're not that massive. They're big in terms of when you look at the volume of cards, but not that big. Okay, so one card is not really a signal, because when I looked at even cards that should be strong signals, like this only happens 10% of the time, I still noticed that it doesn't confer to the future. So if I looked at, okay, in pack 1, I've seen a very late Choco Comet. Will I see more good red cards in packs 2 and 3? No. It doesn't have any statistical difference between what do I see in a normal draft and what do I see in a draft when I saw this late Choco Comet. But when I started to look at multiple signals and number of signals, then I could see actually a sizable effect. So we know that draft signals rely on volume and not really on the strength of one unique signal. You should not be focusing on that. It's good to notice them. It's just not good to put too much weight on them. And my approach at that time was looking at cards that are somewhat useful in the archetype. So they would have over 55% game and hand win rate in that particular archetype. And looking at occurrence that is at least somewhat surprising. And by somewhat surprising, I defined it. There is 40% or less chance of this card being seen at that stage. So I wanted to basically look at useful signals, which means cards that are somewhat good and situations that are somewhat rare. So 40%, looking at these numbers, this is below 40%. So that would have been a signal, seeing Choco Comet at pick 5. Seeing Choco Comet at pick 4 is not a signal according to that definition, because 54 is just above 40% for the number of cards that we see, that we open the Choco Comet. And then this was the distribution of Demir signals in the set that I was doing the analysis for. So at the end of pack 1. So most of drafts had between 2 and 4 signal cards in pack 1 for Demir. There were very few drafts where there was 0 signals for Demir. There's nothing Demir passed, opened, or anything. There was some amount of drafts that had 1 signal, and there was some drafts that had 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 signals. And probably like this 6, 7, 8, 9, these are the drafts where you really can probably get something good from Demir. But of course, the fact that I've seen some signals in pack 1, how does it transfer to packs 2 and 3? And I did calculate it actually when I looked at the numbers of signals seen in pack 1, pick 11. And then I looked at how many signals will be seen in the future past pack 1, pick 11. And this was my first attempt at that kind of analysis. It took me ages to do because it was before my coding stage. I think that now I'll be pretty quicker in doing this thing. But generally what you can see is that the more signals I've seen in pack 1, the more signals I will see in later picks. It's not a huge effect, but when your dominant area is that if I see no signals in pack 1, I'm going to see between 5 and 9 signal cards in later packs. If I've seen 5, it's going to be more like between 8 and 12 signal cards in the next packs. And if I've seen 10, it's going to be more like 11 to 15 signal cards later, which is not nothing. I'm going to see much, much more late goodness if I've seen signals early. But it really needs to be the volume of the signals, not the strength of the signal. So this is a sort of primitive first attempt on that. And I already can just eyeballing it right now. I can find some ways of improving that analysis because, for example, I looked at all the drafts. I looked at the drafts where people drafted Demir, but I also looked at drafts where people drafted other colors, independently of what signals they've seen. So it would be maybe interesting. Is there a difference in seeing future signals if I started drafting the Demir deck or if I let it pass? Because maybe if I let it pass, someone else will go on Demir, and that's why I don't see the signals later. So maybe I would strengthen that signal by eliminating people who did not draft the Demir from the analysis. But then I thought about it and said, okay, so I have this ALSA. I know what the signal is. I know how late cards are getting picked. Why don't I look at it sort of more mechanistically? So I decided that I will measure the ALSA of the card versus the time that the card was actually picked. So if I have this proverbial Choco Comet with ALSA 3, but it's picked pack 1, pick 2, this would give me the -1 because the ALSA of the card is 3. I picked it at 2. So I picked it like 1 pick earlier than the ALSA would suggest. If the card has ALSA 3 and I picked it at pack 1, pick 3, I got a 0 because ALSA is 3. I picked it at 3. Cool. I picked it exactly where expected pick should be. And if I picked it at pack 1, pick 4, then it's +1 because ALSA is 3. I picked it pack 1, pick 4. So I picked it the whole 1 pick later than the ALSA would suggest. And of course, doing it for 1 card, not a very useful activity. But if I did it for every single card in the deck that goes in the deck, and I specifically only looked at the card that go in the deck, I could add all the scores for all those cards playing in the deck and calculate what, on average, how later or earlier than ALSA suggests do I pick cards that I put in my deck. Then I sort of averaged it by the number of cards that went into the deck, and through that I get this number that says how early, how late did I pick the cards for my deck. And this is the sort of resulting graph, like quite a typical normal distribution graph where bunch of the values are sort of like in the middle. So between, let's say, half a pick late and 1.5 picks late, we've got like 80, 90, 70% of the values fall into that kind of range. And then there's a bunch of outliers, cards that were picked earlier than they should have been on average. And we have a bunch of outliers on the other side. Some drafts where people picked cards on average like 3 picks later than they should be going based on ALSA value. But generally, a lot of the stuff is in a very narrow range. So because those values are not very telling, I sort of group them from 1 to 10, where 1 is, oh, in this draft, I picked the cards very early compared to their ALSA. And 10 is, oh my God, did I get the cards super late in that draft? And then everything in between. And I looked at the win rates in each of those categories. And if I draft a draft when I picked the cards super early compared to their ALSA, and all of them were picked super early, win rate is around 52%. And that's not surprising. I had to pick the cards early because my color was probably closed. I couldn't get late good cards for the deck, so I had to pick everything super early. And up until, I think, number 5 bin that I had in this graph, it slowly increases from 52, 53, 54 to 55, and then it stays at around 55% from 5 onwards up till 10, the most open decks where I pick cards super early. So there's not like a big difference, but there's definitely a difference at the early stage of that openness graph. So particularly not open lanes are going to be punishing for you in terms of the win rate. So finding lane when you pick cards later than ALSA would suggest results in more wins. But then I thought, okay, but surely just picking cards late is not enough. So how does it interact with the deck's power? Because I can draft a powerful deck, or I can pick cards late, but they're not really good cards. And even though I pick them late, the deck will not be so strong because I putting poor cards in it. So here I took 2 different approaches to measure that. First of all, I looked at the average ALSA of cards in the deck, under the caveat, under the assumption that, if people pick cards early, they're probably good. Cards picked earlier are normally stronger than the cards that were picked late because people play draft and they try to play it well. And because of that, they try to pick good cards. And most of the time there's data available and they learn. So those powerful cards will get picked earlier and earlier. So low average ALSA of the cards in the deck is a proxy for a strong deck. And then I put the same thing for the deck power as I did for the openness of the draft when I classed them from 1 with the highest ALSA and 10 with the lowest ALSA. And remember, ALSA, the lower the ALSA, the stronger the card. And I calculated the win rate. And we look at this sort of table, I guess. You can see a color gradient that goes from left to right. And this shows that deck power is the determining factor in terms of the win rate. While openness of the draft is not really, because all those lanes, if deck power is 1, it has a very similar win rate independent of the openness. If deck power is 8, it has a very similar win rate independent of how open the lane was. If deck power is 10, it's going to have very similar win rate independent of how open the lane was. So we don't see any effect of the openness of the draft on the win rate, but we do see a strong effect of the deck power on the win rate. But we know that there is an effect of the openness on the win rate. So where is it gone? Where did it disappear? And this is the question that I was thinking for a while. And like, how is it possible that I see that there is an increasing win rate with this ALSA measurement openness, but I don't see it on this graph? And then it struck me. It must be something else. Frequency. And that led me to the next analysis when I did the same plot as before, the same kind of bar or table, but instead of putting instead of putting win rates into it, because here we have win rates, 42% win rate, 59% win rate here, whatever. and with the color. But why don't I just put the frequency? How often, if I'm in one powered open draft, will I get a one power deck? How often, if I'm in 10 power open lane, I will get a one power deck? Maybe it's not like proportional. And in fact, it's very much not. If I am in the very not open lane, in the one power open lane, I will get 30% of the time a one power deck, but only 1% of the time I'm going to get a 10. But if I'm in a 10 open draft, 4% of the time I'm going to get a one power deck, and 20% of the time I'm going to get a 10 power deck. So obviously, it's the win rates here look the same, but the outcome likelihood is much lower. So yes, if I am in a very open lane and I draft a one, I'm going to still lose. But that's probably on me because I didn't draft well, and that will not happen often, because if it's open, I'm going to get those good cards eventually. But if I want a 10 power deck and I try to draft it in a one open lane, it will happen very rarely because there are just no cards because it's not open. Yes, if I get it, if I'm lucky enough that despite the lane not being open, I still get a powerful deck, maybe I was like in a super high power pod or something, I will still have like a decent win rate, but it will just happen very rarely. While if I'm in a super open lane, 20% of the time I'm going to get a 10 power deck. 15% of the time I'm going to get 9 power deck. If I sum those up, like good 50% of the time I'm going to get 8, 9, 10 power deck. And if I sum those up, if I'm in a very not open lane, more than 50% of the time, and way more than 50% of the time, I'm going to get a 1, 2, or 3 power deck. So openness will determine the frequency of the outcomes. And of course, those outcomes, the power deck power, is going to impact my win rate. So by identifying the lane, I will maximize the chance of getting a good deck and therefore getting a high win rate. Simple. So if you draft an open lane, you're more likely to end up with a powerful deck. And this is the main reason for that win rate difference that we see across the openness gradient, is that by drafting an open lane, you give yourself that chance of finding finding a powerful deck. And that is good for you. And it's much less probable if you're drafting a lane that is not open, which I call closed lane, but I don't know. I don't know if it's a good name. But the problem with that one is that ALSA is not a perfect measure for the deck power. I mean, surely you can imagine putting cards that people pick highly but are not very good into your deck, and that will happen sometimes. So instead of that, I looked at the average win rate of the top 20 cards in the deck. I picked top 20 for a good reason. The top 20 sort of takes into account most of the played cards. If I would take all the cards played in the deck, I would take the win rates of lands, and some decks put more lands than the others, and that would not be very good. So I decided to go for the top 20 cards in the deck, which most of them should be spells, not lands. Because you can imagine decks like Towns, they will play maybe 10 non-basic lands, and that will sort of create a lot of noise, and maybe those Town decks are going to be disadvantaged in this particular analysis. So I decided to make sure I took top 20 cards. Maybe on hindsight, maybe I should have taken top 10 cards, maybe top 15. But I wanted to do top 20 just because openness should result that you're weaker, right? Like your 15th to 20th playable should be stronger because the lane was more open. So I took 20. And first, let's look at the win rate as previously. We still see this kind of linear effect. So we see exactly the same thing as we've seen before. The more open the draft, the sort of higher win rate we get. The more powerful the deck, the higher win rate it has, like previously. But it's not as clear as the previous one. So here I can see that these graphs can have either a gradient from left to right, which this one clearly has, or gradient from top to bottom, which this one sort of has. It's very weakly developed, but it's sort of there. or you can have the gradient that is sort of diagonal. This one is more diagonal because it definitely has left to right. If it has both left to right and top to bottom, it will have a more diagonal kind of gradient. This one is not super strong, so I wouldn't die on the hill of defending that you can see clearly a diagonal gradient here, but it's close at it, close to be seen. And then I looked at the frequency of those decks, and we still see that trend. It's not as strong as in the ALSA, but I told you that ALSA's problem was that it was a bit tautological. Yes, if you see cards with low ALSA late, you're going to end up with a deck with low ALSA. That's sort of like self-predicting. Here we disentangle it and we put the game in hand win rate, and because of that there will be much more noise introduced, but you still see that kind of diagonal gradient through the data where you can see that in both directions the colors will change. So there will be more powerful decks if you have an open lane, and more weak decks if you have a closed lane, and you can see this sort of like diagonal gradient here. So the win rate data is sort of much more noisy, but still shows the same kind of things without having a problem with this ALSA tautology. And the message stays similar. Open lanes lead to stronger decks, and stronger decks do win more. So it confirms the same finding with a bit more robust data, even though the graphs look a bit shitter, out of a lack of a better word for that. And this experiment led me to a different question. Drafting in a closed lane will make some cards hard to get. But what are those key cards? Like, are there cards that are needed for the deck? And this sort of led me to a small epiphany that we do have games played win rate. You have 17 lands, you open a table, and 17 lands, you go to card data, and you look at games played win rate, which is the win rate of the card when it was in the deck. Whether it was drawn or not, that's the win rate of the card being in the deck. Then we have a game in hand win rate. This is the win rate of a card when it has appeared in the hand at some stage of the game. This is the one that most people use. And there's also something that people rarely use, but there's games not drawn win rate. This is like the win rate of the card when it was in the deck, but you never drew it. But what about a win rate when you didn't draft the card? And this is not in the table for very good reasons, because, this has to come with an assumption that, okay, I wanted that card in the deck, but I don't have it. But I thought, you know what? Why not? Let's go for the negative space win rate. Let's try to calculate what is the win rate of the card if it was never drafted, if it was drafted once, and if it was drafted more than once in the deck. So you often listen to podcasts, I don't know, Quarter Calls or Lords of Limited, all there are, and they will tell you that, this card, I really want this in my blue-red deck. I don't know, let's say Sahagin. Oh yeah, Sahagin, I really want Sahagin in my blue-red deck. So how can we measure the lack of a card and its impact on the outcomes of the draft? And this is exactly where this negative space win rate comes. I wanted to calculate the win rate when the card is not in the deck. It will have some caveats. So I only calculated for a color combination, and I calculated for all the cards in that color combination. So if I'm looking at blue-red, I'm going to look at all the blue cards, all the red cards, and all the blue-red cards. But not getting a card can be a result of a couple of things. First thing, bad luck. It just was not open. Blue was open. I never saw a Sahagin, which makes me assume that Sahagin was never open in the pot. Or, maybe I've seen a Sahagin, but it was in the same pack as some busted rare, and I couldn't take it, and then I never saw a second Sahagin ever again. But it could also mean that you're in the wrong lane. You decided to go for blue-red because you've heard that blue-red is a good color combination, but someone else in your pod was drafting blue-red without you knowing, and that's why you never saw any Sahagin, because all those Sahagin were plucked before they reached you. And there can be also a third thing, is that you were drafting it, you saw plenty of Sahagins, but you never picked them. That was your lack of knowledge. You didn't know that Sahagin is such an important card in the deck. So because of that, you don't have any of those. And I can't really separate those two. What I say, or can I? No, probably I can't, because it's very hard to separate luck from skill in Magic in general using the data. But yeah, I calculate negative win rate and win rate for one copy, and with more than one copy for each common and uncommon in Final Fantasy for each archetype. I just skip the rares because they would just give too much noise. There's too much luck involved in opening rares, while commons and uncommons are somewhat predictable. And of course, I calculated it for each color pair separately because, 0 copies of Town Greeter in blue-red deck is not really something strange. So I have to ignore the Town Greeter because it's actually weird if someone has 1 copy in blue-red of that particular card. But I did not do that for like cards that have a specific home in given color, mainly because I thought that there it might be actually a result. Like if Gaily Cat is bad in white, green, then it will be a result of some sort. And I go through all the 10 color pairs, which are the top 10 cards where win rate with 1 copy in the deck is the highest versus the win rate with 0 copies. And for black-green, you can see like so well what the plan of the deck is. A blue-green deck with 1 copy of Town Greeter won 3% more than a black-green deck with 0 copies of Town Greeter. So Town Greeter was the most important card for the black-green decks. 3% percentage point difference in win rates between having 1 copy and 0 copies. Summon Fenrir, same. And then we have like, so top 5 is Town Greeter, Summon Fenrir, Resentful Revelation, Cloud of Darkness, and Shinra Reinforcements. Fenrir, which is generically a very strong card, Cloud of Darkness, the Signpost uncommon, and 3 cards that mill you. Not having them was the biggest sort of drop in the win rate. And then we have again Sash Chocobo, Final Days, another synergy card with the milling, Colosseum Behemoth, strong uncommon, Overkill, strong uncommon removal, Sephiroth Intervention, strong removal. But top 5 cards were those, like, among the top 5 cards were those 3 mill cards that specifically improved black-green decks. We go to black-red, and we have a bunch of spells that are not creatures. Circle of Power, Resentful Revelation, Samurai's Katana, Sephiroth's Intervention, Cornered by Black Mages, Vane's Treachery. These are the top 6 cards. Then there's Choco Comet as the 7th. And then you have like Hectai's Black Mage's Rod and Shira Reinforcement. I was actually surprised how Black Mage's Rod was not that high on that list. But apart from that, all of the cards that are non-creature spell. By the way, Absenta HC has a very good point in the chat that those 10 cards in Golgari would make a very good skeleton for a Golgari deck. As much, I think, as the Circle of Power, Revelation, Katana, Sephiroth's Intervention, Cornered by Mages, Treachery, and Choco Comet would make a great skeleton for the black-red deck. And that's the whole point. Seeing this negative win rate makes you realize how important those cards are. Then we have blue-black, and here the top card that is actually having the biggest differential between 0 and 1 copy is Swallowed by Leviathan. And in this card particularly, of course, I can't really say, but I have a good hunch that part of that big difference is also that people who prioritize Swallowed by Leviathan are generally better players. So on top of the difference in the card power by being there and not being there, you also have the effect of better players preferring to play Swallowed by Leviathan in general. And then we have also Side Quest, Hunt the Mark, Eject, Dragon's Wyvern, Combat Tutorial, Vane's Treachery, Sephiroth's Intervention, Overkill, Sleep Magic, Ultras. All those cards very strong in those kind of grindy, semi-controlling blue-black decks that rely on card draw and removal and interaction. Again, I wouldn't mind having all 10 of those in my blue-black deck anytime. White-black, we got Dragoon's Lance, which, by the way, was the reason to play white in this format from what I see. It's like the difference in every white deck that I've seen, Dragoon's Lance adds a ton of power to those decks. Here, Dragoon's Lance, one copy of Dragoon's Lance was 3.5% difference in the win rate versus 0 copies in black-white. And then you can see that white-black really is a white deck. We have Vayne's Treachery, that was the second place. But after that, Magitech Armor, Delivery Moogle, White Mage's Staff, You Are Not Alone, White Auracite, Monk's Fist, and Gaelicat, and Albert Salvagers as the second black card. So out of the 8 cards, 2 are black. And this, lots of people say that there are 2 builds of white-black, and that is more white than black or more black than white. And clearly the answer here is that the more white than black deck was the better one based on those differentials. Red-green, you don't see large differences. It's like maximum 2 percentage points between the 1 copy and 0 copies. And I think that this is an answer why this deck was not so strong. It didn't have like this strong personality, didn't have defining cards. Sash Chocobo was in first place. So the decks with Sash Chocobo won 2 percentage points more games than the decks without. Then you have Town Greeter, Suplex, Standard Magic, Chocobo Kick, bunch of removal basically. Gladiolus, Choco Comet, Summon Fat Chocobo, Bart's Bow, and Gardener at only 0.8% difference, which is very small. So that's within an error. So you can't really treat it even as a difference. And green-blue, we have a collection of things that ramp you or find lands. Top 4 cards are Summon Fenrir, Town Greeter, Sash Chocobo, Dragoon's Wyvern, and Ignis Scientia. So top 5. So 3 of the top 5 cards do something with finding lands or ramping you out even. And Chocobo has an interaction with land, and Dragoon's Wyvern is just a very strong card that does allow you survive the late game. And then you have bunch of interaction, Ice Magic, Swallowed by Leviathan, Eject, Sleep Magic, and the combat tutorial. And it's so blue heavy also when you think about it. It's like, yes, green is there for the ramp. The rest of the thing is blue. That is important. And the rest is probably replaceable or rares, which are not covered by that particular analysis. White-green, I never understood this deck in this format, and maybe I should have done this analysis earlier because maybe I would understand it better. The most important cards seem to be Rhinoa Hartley at 2.7, but the second place is the thing that sort of made me click. It was Weapons Vendor, a card that was technically a red-white card in this format, but somehow it is actually doing much better in those white-green decks. And then I saw the third place, Bart's Bow, and I think that this was the secret of playing white-green. It was the Weapons Vendor and Bart's Bow as a combo, sort of, because adding something +3/+3 and reach for 1 mana is a very good deal. And Bart's Bow and Weapons Vendor, especially late, were going quite late. You can put a bunch of like 1 and 2 drops to get early pressure, drop the Bart's Bow on turn 3, and then start threatening with it, trade it off, and then turn 5 or something, you put Weapons Vendor, go to combat, equip it on something, Bob's your uncle. And yeah, then you have like the collection of the White Mage's Staff, Chocobos, Auracite, Fenrir, Fat Chocobo, and Slash of Light. So again, some interaction, some of those kind of go white cards like Fat Chocobo, and then maybe a bit of ramp with Fenrir. But yeah, I think that I underappreciated in this format how good the Weapons Vendor and Bart's Bow combo is. Then we have the blue-red, the probably the best deck in the format, I guess, at least initially when it's open. And you see a bunch of stuff that you would expect to see. You see the signposts, the Emperor of Palamessi and Shantotto somewhere there high. Ultros is the most important card for the blue-red, and that was my feeling as well. That like if I had an Ultros opening and I could start playing some of those 4 mana spells and tapping out things for a couple of turns, and then turning the corner through that, and then finally killing them with the Ultros and Ice Magic combo, I could see that happening. But yeah, Ultros, Choco Comet, Eject, Ice Magic, Combat Tutorial, Dreams of Laguna, Dragoon's Wyvern, Emperor of Palametia, Shantot, and Swallowed by Leviathan. Interestingly, we did not see Sahagin on the list, which I was expecting to see half. But it turns that Sahagin decks and non-Sahagin decks had similar win rates, even though the differential here is quite high. Like Swallowed by Leviathan is number 10 on that list. That's 2.1 percentage points difference. If you remember red-green, that's more than the top differential in the red-green deck. So generally quite high numbers for the red-green differentials. And white-red, the numbers here are just like crazy, because Dragoon's Lance, a deck with a 1 copy of Dragoon's Lance won 5 percentage points more games than the decks with 0 copies. That's how important that card was for the white-red archetype. And 4.3 for Samurai's Katana. And these are like standing head and shoulders above everything else. So you really wanted those 2 particular key uncommon equipment in your white-red decks. Without them, they were not performing as well, because they bring so much power and synergy at the same time to those decks. And then you get like Delivery Moogle, which is very much probably linked with Dragoon's Lance, because Delivery Moogle can bring up the Dragoon's Lance. And then bunch of sort of equipment and equipment interaction, equipment synergies plus interaction. So you get Battle Menu, Slash of Light, and Choco Comet as interaction, and Paladin's Arms, Adalbert Steiner, and White Mage's Staff as the equipment adjacent cards. And You Are Not Alone as a combat trick that I think was more played by the top players than anyone, and because of that had a higher win rate. And I think the last one is Azorius. Again, we see Dragoon's Lance, 3.3 percentage points difference. So that card was absolutely the most important white card. It was the top card in any white archetype. This is what you want to be doing when you're playing white in this format. Basically, you want to be attacking with the 2/1 flyer quite early. And you got the Wyvern, Delivery Moogle, Aura Sight, Magitech Armor, Combat Tutorial, Gaily Cat, Battle Menu, Ice Magic Eject. So again, a mixture of high synergy things with artifacts plus card draw plus interaction. That was the secret of drafting Azorius in this format, it seems. Okay, so we see that there is an effect of presence or absence of cards in decks and their win rate. But in 17 lands, when you go, we already talked about it, there is this game not seen win rate. So how is it different if I don't draw a card from my deck from if I don't have it in my deck? Is there a difference? Chat, tell me. What do you think? Is there a difference between not having a card in your deck or not drawing it when you have it in your deck? Have my diluted orange juice. Sirelius says, yes, because I still build around it. And that was my feeling, yeah? It's not the same not drawing a card and not having a card. Of course, so I decided to... Surely not drawing a card is similar to not having the card? No. So here is the difference between not having and not drawing. I took those 2 values for a bunch of cards in Izzet, if I remember correctly. I just tested it for 1 archetype. And I just basically deducted the win rate when you don't have a card in your deck and the win rate when you don't draw a card in your deck. So if the value is negative, it means that not having has a much lower win rate than not drawing the card. And here we have the graph, and you can see that a bunch of the cards have minus values, which means that not having has a much lower win rate than not drawing it. And here we have a bunch of cards with the plus sign, so cards where not having is actually better than not drawing it. So cards that you would rather not have in your deck than not draw them. Which means that you're right, Sirelius, that if you put a card in your deck and it's a good card, your other cards are more likely to also be good because you know what you're putting in your deck. If you put a card in your deck that is not good in general, probably you have other cards in that deck that are not good in general, because either you don't know what you're doing or you were just not in the right lane and you couldn't pick good cards, so you had to put mediocre cards in your deck. And because of that, you have multiple mediocre cards in your deck, and multiple mediocre cards in the deck will lose you the game. So then I said, okay, I have this beautiful measure of the difference between when I don't have the card and when I don't see the card. Does it link in any way whatsoever with the game in hand win rate, the most commonly used measure of the card power on 17 lands? Is there a link between this interaction of not having and not drawing a card and the actual win rate? Yeah, so I wrote conclusions here and I didn't skip to the thing because I was stuck on the graph. But yeah, as you can see, cards that have better not in deck win rate and some cards have better not drawn win rate. So high not drawn win rate is a solid proxy for deck quality. So if the win rate of the card, even if I don't draw it, is high, it means that the rest of the deck is probably solid. And so there is a link between delta not in the deck and not drawn, because if the not drawn win rate is high, then the card is probably good. So to test it, I can plot this delta against the game in hand win rate, and that's what I did here exactly. And it's a super strong interaction. So the cards that have a high number of this games not drawn win rate minus games not in the deck win rate, which means that the games not drawn win rate is high, and the games not in deck win rate is low. These are cards with low win rate. When it's a minus value for the games not drawn win rate minus games not in the deck win rate, which means that the games not drawn win rate is low, but the games not in the deck is no, it should be the opposite. I flipped those. Yeah, but if this interaction is having a minus effect, then the win rate of the card is going to be super high. So generally, both interactions between those numbers can predict game in hand win rate, which tells us another thing, that actually game in hand win rate is a good predictor. And then I, of course, came up with the idea, oh dear, but what if it's purely driven by the game not in hand win rate? What if happens if I correlate game in hand win rate and game not drawn win rate? And I did test it, and it does correlate pretty well. And then I was scared for a second that, oh, then why did I do all this analysis when I'm just looking at one value? But I also then correlated the win rate of something not in the deck and the win rate and the game in hand win rate, and they also correlate well. So both of those things are significant interaction, which means that there's a double effect. First of all, the effect of putting bad cards in the deck, leading to bad decks, and then low win rate of the card. Second of all, the effect of powerful cards being crucial for the decks. So best cards have a high game not seen win rate, but decks without those best cards also have lowest win rates because those cards are not in those decks. And this has implications. And that particular implication for you, things that you can use later, is that now you know that in general, high game in hand win rate for a particular archetype is a good proxy for how important the card is for an archetype. Because we can see this strong correlation between the card, the not having a card in the deck and the game in hand win rate, we can sort of infer from that correlation that in future sets, you can see what are the key cards for the deck just by looking game in hand win rate, which is anyway what you were doing. But now we have tested it and we have like a good impression of that. And we also know that not drawing a card is a very, very different thing from not having it in your deck. This is something, again, that we never tested, because we never tested what is a game win rate of a card when you don't have it in your deck. And this comes at the back of Final Fantasy, which was, I guess, famously by now one of the most balanced sets in the living memory, at least since the data era has started. And this can have an impact. Maybe it's not going to be the same in sets that are more lopsided, because the openness of the lane might not be such a good predictor of the power. If there is like one color pair that is so good that 3 people can fight for it and it will still be good, maybe that openness is not going to be a good measure. But for a set like Final Fantasy, it did work. It seems to me. And yeah, I think that next time when I'm trying to do this analysis, I will definitely focus more on those interactions between different types of win rates. One thing I didn't do properly is trying to explore a bit more the link between the openness and not having cards. Like, how many of those key cards will I get in my deck if I'm in the very open lane? What am I going to have, like 10 or 12 on average, while if I'm not in an open lane, I'm going to only get like 6, and maybe that is explaining a lot of that difference. And maybe expand that analysis slightly to the rares and mythics, because but the problem with those kind of analysis, and that's why I didn't do it for the first run, is that they also are very much reliant on the player level. And I do have some data on the player level, and I could also link it to those. So this is the things that I'm going to expand this analysis for the next time. For now, I think that the most important part of this was looking at those negative win rate statistics from cards in each color combination, and finding out that actually game in hand win rate is a pretty good proxy for how important the card is for the deck. And with that, that's it. I made it. Those episodes are always shorter because they are, well, they are exploring new areas, and usually I cannot have that much data for the brand new types of analysis. But hopefully you enjoyed the process of how I'm going through each step and how it's leading to a new analysis, and how you can replicate those kind of sources and those kinds of methods in your ways of thinking about problems. Not only in Magic, really. I mean, in anything, you can sort of try to follow up from one step to another and try to link them craftily, hopefully. And with that, I'd like to thank 17 Lands, because without them, it would not happen. And thanks to my patrons, and thanks to people that support me in other ways. Just a reminder, I do coaching, and I do have some slots for coaching if you are interested in that kind of thing. And with that, I'll see you no longer than in 5 days, Monday, to do the Draft Skeletons episode. We have a banger of a lineup for that. And we're going to be talking about new sets, which looks exciting and looks like it has a ton of interesting mechanics and ton of interesting cards. And for some reason, a strictly better Sipsik Appraiser is uncommon, which probably will be a good uncommon. I'm already telling you here. But with that, I'll see you next week.